Welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast, brought to you by the All About Pigeons nonprofit organization, which is dedicated to promoting education and promotion of the pigeon hobby. Every week, a listener requests to drive our conversations about all things pigeons. Join me, Philip Fry, as we learn and share stories about these incredible birds and this ancient hobby. Today, we're going to be talking about training methods for rollers, racers, pigeons in general. We have with us Rick Mee. He's the NBRC Master Flyer. Right now, he's got the first place position of points on the Master Flyer program. He's most known for his family of Birmingham rollers, the Apple Cup, of course, and many other achievements in the pigeon hobby. So, Rick, thanks for coming on and talking with us. Appreciate it.
Bet, no problem.
You've dabbled in a lot of different racing, rolling, pigeons, and everything throughout your life. What is your background with pigeons, and how'd you get into pigeons?
I thought you wanted to keep this to 30 minutes. This could turn into a long conversation. Uh, okay, let me summarize. I've done a lot of podcasts and stuff, and I'll try to keep this one short. So, long story short, I lived out in the country. We grew up out in the country, and there was a guy that had pigeons on our route. And every day the school bus would stop, and it was right by this guy's house. And I'd look to the left, and sure as hell, he'd be out flying his pigeons, and usually they were sitting on the power lines, and I was just infatuated with how beautiful they were. So I always kept them in the back of my mind. I've been watching this for a couple of years, and my dad was a foreman on a farm. We were out doing some work. I was out working with him. I think I was 9. Yeah, I was 9 years old at the time. And we pulled into this guy's yard with the pigeons. I said, "Oh, this is the guy with the pigeons." And I said, "What are we here for?" And he goes, "Oh, Mr. Martin wants to buy a turkey from us for Thanksgiving." I said, "Okay, cool." And so, well, I'm gonna sit in the truck and look at the pigeons. So I sat in the truck and watched the pigeons out the door. We parked close to the loft. It was just like a little bitty building, I don't know, 12 by 12 and about 4 feet tall. You had to crawl to get in there probably. And he had all these pretty pigeons and some sitting outside. And I said, "Man, that's cool." And so anyway, we pulled out of his yard, and I told my dad all about it. He goes, "Man, you really like them birds, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And my dad kind of owed me some money for helping work every day after school and on the weekends and stuff. And I was saving money up for a little dirt bike, to be honest with you. And he said, "Would you rather have pigeons or a motorcycle?" He called it a motorcycle. And I says, "I'll take the pigeons. I want pigeons." I just said pigeons. I don't know what the hell I was thinking. I'm 9 years old. You think most boys would say, "Oh, I want the motorcycle." But no, I said, "I want pigeons." And from there, it just kind of grew, Phil. About a year and a half later, I found out that one of the guys I played Little League Baseball with, a guy named Donald Weeks, who's now the Tacoma Club, Racing Pigeon Club president, and he was the Evergreen Concourse president. But anyway, we lived about a mile and a half apart. We played Little League Baseball prior to that, finding out that each other had pigeons. One of his pigeons, I strayed in one of his birds, and him and his mom saw it out front of our property and on the power line. And then him and I became good friends after that, and we had a lot of adventures together. I grew up. Well, let me back up just a little bit. So shortly after I got the pigeons, I went into a feed store locally, and it said pigeons for sale. And I went just absolutely ate crazy. I'm like, Mom, look, there's some guy has some pigeons for sale. And anyway, to make that a long story short, I called. My mom says, "You're going to call the guy. I'm not doing it for you." And I called him. And this was back when we had the landlines, with the 50-foot cord and the ugly green phone on the wall. And I got this thing stretched out in the kitchen, and I'm talking. And my mom says, "Ask him what his name is." And I said his name was Jim Wagner. And she goes, "Jim Wagner, ask him if it's the guy on Germantown Road out in Topnish." And I said, "Hey, do you live on Germantown Road out in Topnish?" He goes, "Yeah." And my mom snatched a phone out of my hand and says, "Hey, Jim, this is Barbara Wentz, and I grew up next door to you." And "Oh, Barbara, how you doing?" And da 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 da. Anyway, she knew him. So they said they were having a pigeon show that weekend. And so I showed up to the pigeon show, and I was in heaven, man. All these different colored pigeons and varieties and cages and stuff. And then I met a guy named Rich Farr, who still has rollers. He's the closest guy to me, about 45 minutes away, believe it or not. That's the closest roller guy to me where I live now. And got into the Central Washington Roller Club. I was like when I was, 9, 10 years old, and I was the junior mascot member. All these guys are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and I'm just this little kid. and my mom would drop me off at one of their houses, and they'd ride around on Saturdays, and we had, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 flies a year. I learned a lot about flying rollers, and that's how I got into pigeons, and then I went in the military in '88. And that was the only time in my life that I haven't had pigeons other than, up to 9 years old. And, a guy back home here in Washington State took care of my birds for a few years while I was in the Army getting situated. I was stationed in Georgia, and then I was in Panama when Noriega was down there. That's a long story. And then I came to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, got my birds back in '91, and I've had them ever since. So I took them everywhere I went in the Army, other than military deployments and stuff like that. And then, traveling around the country, got to know a lot of people. And I always knew that I wanted to get into racers, but I didn't want to get into racers until I retired from the Army, because I knew what kind of commitment it was going to take to be successful. I didn't want to be a half-ass flyer and just participate. I wanted to win, just like I was doing with my rollers. So I waited till I got out of the Army, and that first year I had the best. I was champion in the club. Next year I was champion in the combine, and the third year I had the second best loft in the country in the President's Cup. So, and then I moved out to Washington, started flying racers. Got here like in July of 2013, and the guys wanted to give me a bunch of young birds to fly the young bird series, but it started like after Labor Day. And I said, well, hell, they're going to be too young. They're not going to do anything. And besides, I don't want to fly your birds. I want to fly mine. And so I raised a bunch of late hatches, and I flew them as old birds the next year. And I just kicked butt with those too. So I did that for a couple of years, and flew in the combine and did really well. And I was doing so good that some of the guys said, you got to be doing something. You got to be cheating. You got to be doing something. And I got tired of hearing that crap, because that same thing happened in Texas. You do really good and they accuse you of cheating or something. So I just said, well, the hell with that. I'll just start a one loft race. And here I am. I've been doing a one loft race for 10 years. And so I fly rollers, racers, and I got fancy pigeons like you and I were talking offline there. I go to the national every year. I haven't went every year since I retired, but I've went the last, I think, 5 years in a row, and I'll go again this year. I'll see you there. So I just love pigeons all around. Some of these racing pigeon guys, boy, they're really dogmatic. I mean, if it isn't a racer, they don't want nothing to do with it. But I've probably had 50 breeds in my lifetime. I've got probably 20 breeds out there now I'm culling down. But the rollers are always my first love. Racers are a close second. I wish if I had got into the racers when I was just a kid, I probably would have never touched rollers, because racers are just on a totally different level. I mean, that's the most popular breed in the world, and I enjoy them. I enjoy running a one loft race, because if you step on it, everybody knows, but if you do good, everybody knows. So it keeps me on my toes.
So, what are some overlapping truths when it comes to training with rollers and with racers, right? So, let's talk about like bloodlines first. And you probably really see this with your one loft race, and you have your own method of training with your one loft race. So, do you feel like is it a bloodline thing? Like, do certain strains actually perform better, or do you think training methods can kind of overcome even maybe a poor bloodline bird?
I think a good trainer can, if you're talking racers, you could take a commie and you could win with it. I mean, if you know what you're doing. I mean, when I was in Texas, I got some birds from the guy from Sri Lanka gave me some birds he got from the flea market, and I beat everybody in the combine out to about 200 miles. And after that, they start, quality starts taking over. With young birds, it seems like about 300 miles is when the quality starts to surface. Yeah, I mean, yeah, bloodlines, of course, that matters in any performing breed of pigeon. Rollers, racer, doesn't matter, tipplers. But you could give the best birds in the world to a guy that's not a very good trainer, and he's never going to win with them. He or she's never going to win with them. So it's a good combination of both. You got to be a good trainer, and you also you got to have good bloodlines too. Good bloodlines definitely make it a lot easier. But when we're talking rollers and racers, we're talking that's two totally different animals. I mean, racing pigeons, you're breeding for individual qualities. You want the bird to be self-motivated and to get out front and to win. Race rollers, you want them all to be thinking exactly the same. That's the key, with rollers to get them rolling collectively is to get them all thinking the same. And the way you do that is to inbreed and line breed and breed. What I do is I try to breed around one pigeon, and that way all the genetics line up and the birds line up physically, mentally, all that stuff. But it's an interesting dynamic having both racers and rollers, because rollers you're doing something totally opposite than you're doing with racers. Rollers you're trying to make a team out of them. Racers you're trying to find the individuals, the rare gem.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, even just breaking that flock mentality with the individual tosses, like you want it to not stay with the flock and always find that way back.
Yeah, but rollers are opposite, right? You
Yeah.
want them to all stay together and you want to work together collectively. And the name of the game with rollers is to try to get them to roll as possible together, as deep and fast as possible together. And so it's a totally different. You have to have a different breeding mentality when you breed that way. Now, a lot of roller guys, they'll just breed for sheer quality and depth, and so they just overlook the team concept altogether. Well, that's why they never win any competitions, because their birds are just up there like yo-yos doing individual rolls. But
Well, let's talk about the roller side of it then, as far as like you've created the family of birds, the Rick Mee rollers, and can you talk us through, how did you come across that process? A really was it just through breeding, or was it like through breeding with a really strict regimented training process?
when I grew up here flying rollers in the Northwest, some of the guys that I flew with right here in this valley, because I moved after I retired from the Army, I moved back home to where I grew up. And where I grew up is about 10 miles from where I'm at right now. The guys in this area had really good pigeons, and they shared those birds with me, but they didn't give me their best. They did not give me their best. It was always their colds, something they didn't want. And I was able to pick out the best, or birds that they made a mistake on and accidentally gave me something they shouldn't have, or maybe they didn't have time to fly. And so I flew them for them and I picked out the best. And then I was two generations into my own breeding before I went into the Army in 88. I got pigeons in 76, and I started working on my own family around 82. Is when I really started, kind of coming up in my mind, okay, how am I going to breed to make better rollers? And at the same time, I had racers too. I had Beckerts and Bastines. But I didn't fly in a club because I did go to a meeting with my buddy Donald Weeks, like I mentioned earlier, when we were about 15 years old. And when they started talking about clocks and fees, I'm like, we're looking at each other going, dude, we can't even drive a car yet, and I can't afford a clock. So that's why I stuck with the rollers until I retired from the Army, because rollers were easy. You fly them in your backyard, you get off work, you fly them in your backyard. And, yeah, I had deployments and stuff, but my wives, I was married two different times in the Army. They would take care of the birds while I was on deployments and or out in the field for 30 days or whatever. But I don't know if that answered your question or if I got sidetracked like I oftentimes do.
When you were working with the family, was it specifically through a breeding style?
So we're talking rollers here. So what I did was I started with birds that I got locally. I went in the Army for a couple of years. A friend of mine sent my birds to me, and then in '91, I got stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as part of the 82nd Airborne Division. And there was a guy, Joe Bob Stuka, Major Joe Bob Stuka, very famous roller guy, won the World Cup, judged the national fly, really good dude. Anyway, Joe Bob took me. He was stationed right where I was at. He was in the Air Force. I was in the Army. Our bases were connected together, and he took me around all the roller guys in the Carolinas. And they said, "Hey," and Joe Bob was pretty demanding, and he was kind of the kind of guy everybody would listen to, because he was a major in the Air Force. He was an officer. Hey, give this kid some pigeons, man. He's getting started. He had rollers back home. They didn't know how serious I was, Philip. I just kind of played coy. I've been flying in a club since I was a kid, so I knew how to fly rollers. But I told them, I had rollers, but I didn't want to be braggadocious and say, hey, I already know how to fly rollers. I've been doing 20 bird competitions since I was a little kid. I didn't say any of that. I just kept my mouth shut. They gave me a bunch of birds to fly. Long story, I think I got 65, 70 birds from like 10 different families, and I flew them, and I got rid of all of them. And I kept just one bird, this bird from Wendell Carter, North Carolina. He's passed away, a really good dude, and bred that into my family. And then 96, I borrowed a bird from Jerry Higgins and I bred that into my family. I culled all the birds that I raised except for one, 0047, I raised in 96. I brought her back into my family. And around 2006, 10 years later, I brought in some Bob Westfall jackanets from Missouri because I had watched his birds fly a couple times and I knew that they were super frequent. And I was having a problem in Alabama with my birds elevating because of the humidity and the heat and everything. So I needed birds that were naturally buoyant, could fly higher. And Bob's birds were, his birds would go and they'd work all day long. But the problem was they'd fly too high. So I crossed those into mine. And that's kind of where I'm at now. I just, when I do an outcross with rollers, I will literally get rid of all the crosses and then just keep the very best one to mate back into my family. So that way, all my birds kind of line up mentally, genetically, and all that stuff. That's how I did that. If you want to talk racing pigeons, I was one of the first ones to get the Alphonse Claus birds. My buddy Ken Easley out in New Mexico contacted me. It would have been a couple years before I retired in 2008. So it was about 2006. And he says, Rick, you're getting into racers, aren't you? And I said, yeah, I'm going to get into them as soon as I retire. And he said, well, check out this guy, Alphonse Claus. I'm like, who the hell is that? And he said, well, he won the World Ace Challenge last year. He won the $1 million race last year, and he bred the bird that won the $1 million race this year. And I said, hell yeah, I want some of those. That sounds good. And so I was one of the first ones to get the Claus birds. But before that, I bought a bird from Dave Clausing, which was off of his Never Say Die hen, the one that won the $1 million race. And the sire to this bird was named Breezy, who was 99th in the $1 million race. And that same year, his nestmate was 101st. So they were 99 and 101st. And so the 99th place bird was mated to Never Say Die, which I think won the year before. And so I took that cock bird that was the Hubin blood, which Dave Clausing blood, and crossed it on the Claus birds, and that's what I really did well in Texas with, and then I brought out here to Washington, and I still fly that stuff. It's done well for me. One Loft races, club race, and all that stuff.
With your one Loft race, how are you training those birds?
I train them like if I was in a club, but a little more careful because I jump my birds a lot more and quicker when I'm flying my own pigeons.
Yeah.
But we fly when I've trained out in Texas, it was flat as a pancake where I lived. There's hills around and stuff, but they're nothing like. I mean, these are mountains compared to those, and so I was able to jump the birds out to 60 miles after 6, 7 tosses. I was out there, and I would stay at 60, and I'd just pound them at 60 miles. Here, I've got a ridge line that's about, and the only way we could fly here is from south to north. That's the only way we can fly here because you can't go west because you run into the Cascade Mountains in the Pacific Ocean. You can't go north because you run into Canada. You can't go east because you run into the Rockies. So you got to go south. And so I raced through the entire state of Washington, the entire state of Oregon, and out of Northern California, I released last year at Mount Shasta, and I will again this year too. So that's 375. But last year, we logged more training miles than any other one Loft race out there. It was well over 2,000. I think I had 57 or 60 training tosses. I train a lot, and that's why people send birds to me because they like the way I train. And I get that comment a lot. They say, Rick, we send birds to you every year because you train the hell out of them. Some people say, hey, you train like I used to or like I do. And so, what we've got a lot of obstacles in their way out here on this course. And if they make a mistake, they can end up in another valley or on the other side of a ridge line or on the other side of the Cascade Mountains, and it's tough, man. It's tough. But having said that, and I do believe we have one of the tougher courses in the U.S. I think that the guys in Utah got some pretty tough terrain too. But last year, statistically, we had the best percentages of any one loft race. We had 90 to 93% returns on every single race. That was even at Mount Shasta 375. I don't know if you paid attention to that. The top one loft race bird in the country that Tony Cuevas put together, that
Yes.
there was 10 of the biggest races in the US last year. I think there was about 10,500 birds or 11,500 birds from 10 different races, and there was 32 or 33 birds that qualified for that award. And the way that award works is you got to finish, a bird in your race has to finish in the top 15% 4 races in a row, the last 4 races. There was 33 birds that qualified, and guess how many we had? 16.
Oh, wow.
We had half of the pigeons that qualified out of the top 10 biggest one loft races in the country. So when you ask questions about what do you think about training or how do you train, I train the hell out of the birds. And that's why people send to me, because I train hard and I'll get the best out of them. It's the same thing with rollers. I'm a really hard trainer, and I don't running a one loft race is totally different than having your own pigeons. Your own pigeons, I cull. I'm pretty tough,
Yeah.
but running a one loft race, the goal is you're not trying to motivate individual pigeons. You're just trying to get the flock to come home in good time and to find out which are the best pigeons, on an even playing field. When I flew in a club, it was totally different. I was motivating birds. I was supplementing birds. I was doing all kinds of stuff, feeding at certain times of the day. You don't do that in a one loft race. You're just trying to keep the birds healthy, and you're trying to treat them all the same. So that way nobody's at an advantage.
And that's a pretty short period of time that you have that many birds. So I mean, that is a lot of tosses that you're doing, a lot of releases.
Well, I toss them at least 2 times and usually 3 times between races every 7 days.
Okay.
So that adds up because you got 5 races. So that's 15 tosses right there. And then prior to that, we get 20 some tosses in or more.
So with the racing, like what kind of downtime do you think a pigeon would need to recoup?
It's all based upon what I see. If it's a super, super easy race and I get 95% of the pigeons all come in within a short amount of time, then I know that I've got them dialed in right. And I cannot coddle the bottom 3 or 4 or 5%. I can't. You got to keep trudging on. It's just like Saturday, we had the worst toss we've ever had in running this one loft race in 10 years. The worst. It was from Sadish Pass. It's our normal 45-mile spot. The birds came in all discombobulated. They were all spread out. I was missing 300 birds by the end of the day. I was pretty distraught, to be honest with you. But over the last 2 days, we've got 150 more in. So we ended up losing 10%, which I've had a lot of people text me and call me and say, "Hey, Rick, you're doing a great job. That shit happens." I take that personally. I didn't want to lose any of them, Philip. I really wanted to get 90% plus activated this year, but that's not going to happen. But we might get pretty close. You're going to lose a few more pigeons as you start getting out to 65, 70, 80 miles, whatever. But calling around, it seems that the guys in Oregon, the Oregon clubs had a horrible race Saturday also. And the Evergreen Concourse said they had the worst race they've ever had. They had huge losses. So
Huh.
there was just some weird crap going on in the air Saturday. And I wish in hindsight that I could foresee that. But of course, we're not mind readers. We don't know what's going to happen. So we're not, we can't foretell the future. I wish we could. But, it is what it is. So when you talk about training and recuperation time and all that stuff, I can tell you this, that the birds are sitting out in the loft, 90% of them that are out there, they came in pretty good time. And so I'm kind of at this conundrum. I was talking to my wife about it today. I said, hey, what do I do now? Most of the birds that are still in the loft did really well, and they don't deserve to be held back just because the 5 or 10%. So my plan is to set them up for a training toss tomorrow. But if the weather looks crappy again, or we have smoke roll into the area,
Oh, yeah.
we've been extremely lucky this time of year. This at this point, up to this point, because we haven't had any smoke this year, so it's been real easy to train. In years past, we have a lot of fires up here in the Pacific Northwest, and it usually puts a real damper on our training. I mean, in a perfect world, what I like to do, say we're going to race on a Saturday, and everything goes well, the birds come in good. It was an easy race. Sunday they get the loft line, that's their bath day. Monday I loft fly them again, that's their bath. I give them a bath again, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm down the road, and then Friday I basket them. They don't come out of the loft at all. I set them up with feed. I feed them early in the morning, and then Saturday will be the race again. As the distance increases, a lot of times I'll train on, if the race is Saturday, they'll loft fly and have baths on Sunday and Monday, and then Tuesday I'll train them like 60, 65 miles. Wednesday I loft fly. Thursday I take them 60 miles again, and then Friday they stay in the loft. I feed them super ultra early in the morning. I load them up late in the evening before I hit the road, and then I drive down to Southern Oregon or California, wherever the hell it is, and sit there overnight and release the birds in the morning after they get a good drink of water. And it's just a lot of observation. I spend a lot of time in the loft. I probably go in there 20 in and out 20 times a day. I'm always looking for, especially during intake, I'm always looking for sick birds. If a bird is sick, I snatch it up quick. And just by experience, I might give it a day or two to recoup. And if it's not going to, then it's cold. I call the breeder and say, yeah, bird's out of here. This year, we had the best health we have ever, ever, ever had. I think we brought in 1,650 birds, 675 or something, and we pulled out about 25 pigeons due to sickness, injury, whatever. So that's why I'm still kind of distraught over Saturday's bad toss, because I still had 97% of the pigeons I started training with. And I'm like, oh man, you're going to look like a genius, Rick. You're going to look great. And then this crap happens. And so I call some of my one law phrase buddies, and I'm kind of licking my wounds and looking for a little emotional support. And they're like, dude, it happens, man. I'm like, yeah, but I can't come out and say that I can't put on Wind Companion in my updates and say, shit happens. It's pigeon flying. No, you can't do that. But because some of these guys, I mean, they treat their pigeons like I shouldn't even say, but they treat them like they're poodles, like they're part of their family, like,
Yeah,
oh my
yeah.
God, my pigeon. Dude, I'm not that way. I'm kind of cutthroat. It's like a long time ago, somebody said fly or die, only the best survive. And that's kind of my philosophy on flying rollers, racers, everything. I know we're kind of jumping all over, but racers, I expect them to fly before they breed. I don't breed for stock, and I very rarely buy pigeons anymore because I don't feel I need to. I stay off the auction sites because it's too tempting. But I fly them. I send them to one off races. If they do good, I'll breed from them. If they don't, give them to a new guy if I get them back, or don't make that pair up the next year. It's a real simple system I got. It's all performance based, man. That's it.
What do you think is a pretty common mistake? Do you think a lot of people are undertraining, maybe overtraining, like when it comes to rollers and racers?
Under training.
Undertraining.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe overtraining. There's a lot of people that aren't really good with animals per se, and they just kind of, some old timers, said, "Hey, write this down. This is the schedule. This is how you need to fly them. This is how you need to feed them," and they stick to that. But being good at this is being able to make slight adjustments based upon observation and experience, and not everybody's got that. And some people, I mean, I heard one guy quoted, when we're going to rollers, he said, some guys can't fly a kite, let alone a kit, you know? And
Yes.
I don't know why I always say, like, we're talking, how guys talk, and I say, oh, so-and-so couldn't fly a roller out of a wet paper bag. I don't know where I come up with that at, but It's just the truth. I mean, you get some guys that have been doing this their whole life and they're never any good at it because they just don't have the know-how or the discipline. It really comes down to discipline, dude. If you're going to be good with a performance animal, you have to be disciplined yourself. I come from a very disciplined background. I was an athlete. I was in the military. I was always put in leadership positions. I've been pretty successful whatever I put my mind to, Philip. I just if I put it in my mind that I'm going to be good at something, then I'm going to give it 110%. And I'll be honest, there's a lot of things that I've given up in life. I like fishing, I like hunting, I like doing a lot of stuff. I like going to the gym, believe it or not. I was a gym rat back in the day. You can't tell now, but I was a bodybuilder. I used to love that lifestyle. But that kind of set me up for pigeon flying. When I got into this one loft race thing, I said, man, I am made for this. This is me. Well, I'm 58 years old now. So what was I, 48 when I started this business? And I was, you're a coach. You're a
Right.
coach. You're
Yeah.
teaching those racers. And if you fly rollers, you're teaching them rollers. And you're the coach. And I'm like, well, I'm too old to be playing sports. So let me be the coach now. And so that's how I kind of look at it. Like I'm the coach. And I will say this, and this might cause a little controversy for those listening, but I'll tell you what, flying rollers is a hell of a lot harder than flying racers. I mean, rollers, when you kick out a kid of rollers, you have to be intently studying those birds from the time they go out to the time they land. And you're trying to figure out every pigeon up there, what their individual merits are, and how are they going to fit into your team. Racers, they might be more time consuming because of the time on the road that you have to take with training them, but they sort themselves out. The best come home, the worst do not. It's easy, man. You just keep them healthy and know how to motivate them and supplement them at the right time and know when to feed, how much to feed. It's easy. There's no rocket science to it. But if you go visit anybody that's successful with pigeons or successful with anything in life, they're always very disciplined. You know what I mean? They've got a
Yeah.
regimen. They're regimented. When I got into racers, this is what I did. I went into the AU National Database and I looked up all the flyers in my combine. There was 55 of them in the Central Texas Combine. And I wanted to see who's the best. And I wanted to see who was in the top 10 in the AU awards every year from my combine. And then I commenced to go out and visit those guys. And there was like three of them.
Oh, there you go.
And then I went and visited those guys. And then I went and visited everybody else. And the other guys it was like night and day. These guys are just intent. They are intense. You go to their place and everything is dressed right, dress, and you got to have a little bit of OCD to be pretty good at pigeon flying. And then you go to some guys' houses and their birds are wild and they got trays full of feed all day long, all this crap. They ain't gonna win a race, man. They're not gonna win. The same thing with rollers too. But when you're in the presence of a really, really good pigeon flyer, you know it just the way that they talk and just when you walk in the backyard, you look around like, okay, this guy. I was lucky growing up in this area and starting pigeons at a young age with a bunch of guys that were pretty good at it, and they taught me how to fly, racing or rollers, and then eventually, got into racers. So
When you were joining those clubs, were you kind of taken under the wing by all the members, or did you ever have like a mentor that helped you along with this?
not really. The only guy I ever mentioned as a mentor was a guy named Jay Thomas. He's dead now, died of emphysema, but Jay was an old hippie that worked at the local community college, and he taught guitar. He was an old hip. He was a hippie from way back. I mean, and he didn't want to conform to society or anything like that. He didn't really hold down a normal job. I don't think he ever did. But he taught guitar lessons at the college. That's how he earned a little extra money. And even though he had emphysema, he smoked like a sieve. My mom, when she would go to town up here to Yakima, I grew up in a little rural town called Wapato on the Indian reservation. Most of my friends were all from the reservation. Anyway, she'd drop me off at his house, and I would spend hours in his backyard when we'd go to Yakima, and she'd go do her shopping at the department stores and grocery shopping and shit. And go in the backyard and watch this guy fly his pigeons, and I learned a lot of what not to do by watching this guy fly his pigeons. And I said, I know better than that, or I can do better than that. And but having said that, now I went in the Army in 88. In 2000, 95, 96, I got stationed back here. I re-enlisted to come back home and there was a military base here called the Yakima Training Center, and I got stationed there. So I went over and visited this guy for, I don't know, he was pretty sick by that time, but 6 months, 8 months, not even a year before he passed away. And he had thrown one cockbird in with a whole bunch of hens, like 20 hens. And so all the babies that he raised in that section were off that one cock and those hens. And it seemed like they were all red checks, if I remember right. He flew those birds for me. And remember now, these birds are all half brother, sister, full brother, sister. And when I saw their kitting and their breaking ability and all that stuff, I said, okay, this is what I need to do. And that's why I'm a real big proponent of polygamy breeding for rollers, to get your birds mentally on the same plane. Racing pigeons, I've done it also, because if you have say you have a really good cock and some really, really good hens, well, why in the hell are you going to breed out all the junk? Use them other birds, all them experiments are the ones that you maybe have a feeling on, but here's a bird that's a proven breeder, and you just improve your percentages by breeding from him. And so I do a lot of fostering eggs. My best breeders don't generally raise many babies on their own, if any at all. My racers, especially, they don't raise babies at all. I float all the eggs and let the foster parents breed them, which is just a bunch of birds I've got back from one loft races that didn't do very good. One tip that you want to give guys that send birds to one loft races is just because your bird didn't do well doesn't mean you shouldn't bring it home, because a lot of people, like with me, I run a one loft race. They'll leave all their birds here that they don't want back. And then you're stuck with a bunch of pigeons. But me, I want them all back when I send them to a one loft race, because I want to handle them all. And I want to see which ones did the best, and do they handle differently than the ones that didn't do as well. And generally, that's true with me. Those birds that you get back from one loft races, they have natural disease resistance that they have built up.
Yeah.
From being in that one loft race setting, and they pass that on to their youngsters. So that's why it's so important to get those birds back, because you have to have a starting point, right? I mean, like a guy explained it to me one time, one of the top guys in the country. He said, okay, first of all, set your goal at 20%. Bird has to finish in the top 20% on the final, and then eventually it has to be in the top 10%. Then eventually it has to be, you keep sending them back, and eventually it has to be on the first drop. And when you start breeding from birds like that, and I'll throw another element in, I want birds that are consistent. When we're talking racers here, they have to be consistent. I don't want one hit wonders that did crap the whole series and then they just show up at the end because it might have been a mistake. Might have got lucky. It might have been an easy day. The bird might have just been feeling good that day and got in with the lead flock. I want a bird that pounds it every single race. And those are the kind. I've got a bunch of birds out there. I mean, I've got the hen last year that won the Apple Cup, average speed winner. I bought her. I've got in 2015, I bought the bird that won. She was a 2016 bird, actually, or no, 2015 bird. Lazy AC 538. I've got that hen. She was first average speed. I got a bird recently that was third average speed in the Texas Dash for Cash 2021. I got that bird. I've got the hen that was first average speed in the Sooner Challenge 2022 for Rex, my buddy Rex, Semper Fi Rex. And I got a bird that was fifth average speed in our race last year, and the guy was a local guy. He passed away. He sent 5 birds. All 5 went to the final. 2 of them went in the money. All 3 of them were in the top within the first 20 minutes. Exceptional pigeons. I was trying to buy that bird before the guy died. Then he passed away. And a month later, his wife says, hey, you still want that bird? Yeah, I'll buy it from you. So I fill my breeding loft right now, Philip, is all full of birds that were top average speed birds. I've got another cock out there with 6 average speed, and I've got another hen that was 8th average. Just I try to get those type of genes. That's what I'm looking for, because I want a pigeon that is absolutely consistent.
Yeah.
Week in and week out, not just win at the end, but win every week. Rollers, I like to fly them for a year and a half, 2 years. I'm in a good spot out here. It's windy, it's hot, but I don't lose a lot to birds of prey. That's the reason I moved here, because I knew that I talked to a lot of pigeon people in this area, and I fly them out for several years. And what I do is I keep my birds marked up with colored hairspray year round, so that I can see what a bird does every time I let it go. A lot of people, they only mark their birds up right before a competition. I keep mine marked year round, so I know who's doing what on a weekly basis. And the ones that are consistent are the ones that get to breed. And it's the same thing with my racers. The ones that are consistent are the ones that get to breed.
Looks like we're coming up against the clock here.
I told you we would get going, man. We need a couple hours to cover everything.
Well, anybody who's interested in checking out his one loft race, his website for that is applecupyc.com. His website is rickmeerollers.com, and you can find Rick on Facebook too. Just look up Rick Mee. He keeps a lot of the posts and everything for the Apple Cup and everything else on there too. But Rick, thanks so much, man. This has been real fun, real informative.
You bet, bud. Anytime. Might have to do a part two, because we're just getting started.
I think so. Thank you for listening to another ad-free, listener-requested episode of the All About Pigeons podcast. If you like the show and want to help it keep it going, as well as supporting your other pigeon promotional work, head to the website PigeonPod, that's pigeonpod.com. You can make a donation there. If you can't make a donation today, support the show by giving us a good 5-star review wherever you're listening to us at right now. That really helps the podcast and helps the algorithm get us out there to other people who might not know about Pigeon Podcast. If you have any episode requests, upcoming pigeon shows, competition results, or you want to be a guest on the show and just talk about some pigeons, or you have a shout out for a friend, shoot us an email at staff@pigeonpod.com. Thanks again for listening. We really appreciate your support, and remember, together the hobby thrives. Support each other and enjoy your pigeons.